This semester on the Church307 podcast, we're just going to meet some people, some real life people who have given their lives to Jesus Christ. So sit back and hear some great stories. Hello, welcome to the Church307 podcast. I'm sitting here today with Julia Rasse, and the Rasse family and our family have been close for a long time. You practically helped raise my kids.
For a little bit there.
Yep. And so we've gotten really close over the years, and I asked her if she would come and share with us part of her story, kind of what it's been like to grow up in the church, and I'm excited to hear what she has to say. So Julia, maybe you can kind of give us the short version of your life story. Who are you and what do you do and how'd you get here?
Yeah, so my parents grew up in the Lutheran church. That's actually where they met during college. They got married in Sioux Falls. They shortly after had me, and then they moved out here for a job opportunity for my dad. My entire life, I have been so incredibly blessed and grateful for what I've had. My dad worked 4 jobs so that my mom could stay home with me and my 2 younger sisters.
Wow. Because
of that, it led to an amazing relationship with everyone in my family. And my grandparents were like across the street from us, and my cousin lived a couple streets down. So just a really close and blessed family. When I was in a late elementary school, my mom started to work. So and she was a teacher too. My dad's a teacher. And so we would travel during the summers. And because they grew up in a Lutheran church, we decided to be a non-denominational family. And it wasn't until our associate pastor passed away when I was 16 that we kind of realized that maybe a denomination was kind of for us. So we started to church hop after that. And it wasn't until after COVID, after I came back and I was like, I don't really want to continue to go to the church I grew up in, that we came here. And after that, it kind of set a set zone of, well, this church wasn't quite like New Life in this sense or this sense. So we came back, and ever since then, it's been really great. And yeah.
So you differentiate between the denominational churches and the non-denominational churches. What do you see as the main differentiation? What's different between the two options?
I think the main difference is kind of how loose non-denomination can be. Not that that's a bad thing. Sometimes having super strict codes or rules that you have to follow can be it can be dangerous. It can be kind of bad. It can be good for some people. Some people really like the structure, but oftentimes it can draw people away. Well, you're not following our rules, so you can't follow Jesus anymore. You can't be in our church. So I think that's kind of the big thing, is how loose versus sometimes the rules. I'm not saying the rules are bad either, because I'm sure there are rules for Wesleyan churches, and that's also a good thing. So I think that's a big difference. There's like how loose versus like the rules that there are.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Some denominations are very strict in terms of a lot of central control from the denomination over the churches. And then you have some other denominations that more have loose control or maybe almost no control. I was just talking to a pastor who's a Southern Baptist pastor, and they call it a conference, not necessarily a denomination, because each church is pretty much autonomous in their own. So you got to, even within the denominations, you've got different differentiations there. Would you say that now you are passionate one way is the best way, and you believe that there is one best way to do churches?
I still don't feel like there is like one true best way to do churches, especially being a Gen Z. I see a lot of, well, this is like the best way and this is the best way. And I still kind of think that there are good and bad ways to do church. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love being at New Life. I think for me, this is the best thing for me. But for other people, maybe they do need that more strict. This is how I have to follow, kind of like your sermon of like, this is the line and this is the line for me. I feel like for some people, that's how church has to be too. Yeah,
that's really good. So tell us about your spiritual journey. Was there ever a time when you fell away from God, that you turned your back on what your parents taught you or the church that you were a part of?
Yeah, so I obviously grew up in the church. And again, it was a non-denominational. It wasn't until I was 16, like I said, our associate pastor passed away. It was due to cancer. And it was kind of hard because he was such an amazing man and his wife was such an amazing woman. And I didn't necessarily fall away from God, but I kind of fell away from the church. And I didn't always agree. He kind of was like a level head for them sometimes. And so I would still go, but it was like, I don't really agree with what the church itself is saying, but I still really love what like Jesus and the Bible and God is saying.
Yeah, that's good.
It wasn't until college. And again, it wasn't like a falling out with God or Jesus. I just didn't go to church. I had a lot of people from my youth group. They were like, come do this stuff with us. And like NAVS, I was down at the University of Wyoming and I didn't go. I actually secluded myself in my room. It was kind of a hard time in my life. And then when I came back after COVID, I still didn't go to church. I was like, I don't want to go to church. I don't want to go to church. I'll go to a different church, but I don't want to go to church, like that church. And so, again, it wasn't really like a falling out with God or Jesus. It was just a falling out with the church, unfortunately.
What are some things that you've seen as discrepancies between what the church teaches and what Scripture would teach? Or maybe you said that you liked Jesus, but you didn't necessarily like the church. What is the things that you liked about Jesus but didn't like about the church? Yeah,
so I had a youth pastor that once said, WWJD, what would Jesus do? And that always kind of stuck with me as, am I going to love like Jesus or am I going to love like the church? And our church at the time was kind of a more like cowboy-y, kind of conservative. And so like there was no one who would be gay there. There would be no one who was like, if they were going through a divorce, it was kind of hush hush. If you were living with somebody unmarried, that was not something that you would like necessarily talk about. And so it was kind of like, that was kind of the main difference, is the church just didn't like to talk about that very much. Or if they did, it was like, well, this is a bad thing. Whereas Jesus, he sat with people and, he sat with the prostitutes and he talked to those people and he was like, I still love you. Whereas the church and a lot of churches still, they're just kind of like, we don't like, that's bad. You have to fix your life before you can come to Jesus. Whereas Jesus is like, come to me and then we can fix your life.
That's really good. Yeah, we are tempted to make people change to be like us before they're one of us. Yeah. Instead, Jesus says, come and be one of us, and then you will change to become like us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Was there a point at which, and maybe it was the same time period, at which your faith became yours, that you became passionate about following Jesus, not just because your parents followed Jesus, but was there a transition time where you decided, no, I'm going to pursue this on my own?
I was about 20 years old. After COVID, I had gone back to school finally, and I met 3 girls who all grew up in the church, and they were like, well, now what? We have no youth group. 2 of them were pastor kids, and they were like, well, I just kind of follow what my parents follow. And when we kind of talked about, they're like, well, I don't really agree with that. But like me, we still agree with certain parts of like the church or the Bible, or we agree with the Bible and certain parts of the church. And so that was kind of the turning point of like, this is no longer my parents' religion. This is no longer my church's religion. This is no longer the youth's religion. This is my religion. This is for me. This is why I'm going to church. So I was about 20 years old when I met those friends, and we were like, yeah, this is for us.
What did your parents do right that made it so that you made that decision? How Proverbs says, train up a child in the way you should go and he will not depart from it. Like, how did they train you up correctly so that you ended up choosing to follow Christ as an adult? So I kind of reworded it, but my mom essentially wants the 3 H's in life: happy, healthy, and to have all of the opportunities we can in life. And with that, they really kind of let us go be like on our own. And when I was questioning if I wanted to continue to be in that church, they went with me to other churches and they listened to other sermons with me. And it wasn't like, you can't do this because we aren't doing this. It was you're checking this out, so maybe there's a reason why. And not only are we going to let you, but we're going to go with you. Wow, that's very cool.
Yeah.
How would you say the church helped you in that journey? What did the church do, whether it was this church or other churches? What did they do right that kind of helped you stay true to your faith after you became an adult?
A lot of it has to do with kind of that fight against like the rules of like, well, you know, this church is as come as you are. Mm-hmm. And like you said, you know, we have to come to Jesus with our problems. We can't just like fix them first. And that's something that really kind of made me realize, you know, this is for me. And then this past summer, you had a lot of sermons that kind of pushed those boundaries of like, well, actually, is this really biblical, or is just this kind of like something that we do because, you know, it's like morally ethical? And that really, it's kind of, I wanted to be in a church that kind of pushed the theology and was like, well, is it truly biblical, or is this a human rule?
Yeah.
And that just really helped. It was like, yeah, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I've been needing.
It's so cool to hear you say that. That's been a passion of mine my whole life. I feel like the churches I grew up in did what we did because that's what we have always done, not because that's what Scripture taught us to do. Yeah. And I feel like there's a lack of authenticity and honesty when we try to enforce our preferences on our congregations because and I think usually it comes from a place of wanting to help. I mean, the Pharisees felt like if we enforce these rules on people, we will be helping people.
Yeah, for sure.
And at least initially, they thought that they were doing this for good reasons. But the problem is it's a slippery slope that always leads people away from God, because as soon as I realize I'm following this rule because you're making me follow this rule, not because God tells me to follow this rule, that's when I realize, okay, if I can't trust you here, what are other things that you're making up? Yeah,
exactly.
Are there things like that, more things like you mentioned a couple of them, are there more things like that where you see discrepancies between what the church has taught or rules that they enforce and what Scripture teaches?
So in my life group, I met this kid who he like followed, kind of picked and choose what rules he followed. So like people are like, well, you can't have tattoos. That's not biblical. And it's like, well, also in that same like passage, it talks about not having clothes made out of the same material. And he would pick and choose that, or like women can't be pastors or preachers. And I was like, okay, but like, is it in the Old Testament? And where is it at in the Old Testament? And so those are just kind of a lot of things. I think a big turning point for me was the church is super big on like sexual moral stuff. And I think that can be shameful if stuff happens, or if people are, you know, assaulted and then they're like, well, that's bad. And it's like, okay, but like sometimes it's not their choice. And that always made me really upset. And it just kind of drove a wedge between me and what the church was saying. And so I started to dig into like, what does the Bible actually say about X, Y, and Z? You know, Jesus sat with the prostitute. And it's just that, those are things that just, it was like, there is no, these are old commandments. These are old things that are said.
Yeah. So, the church has a temptation of picking out certain sins that annoy us more than other sins. And we create this us versus them scenario where it is the church against the people who sin in these certain ways. And we've just created a wall between us and them, at which there would just be an extreme difficulty for them to ever become a part of our fellowship and learn the teachings of Christ, because we've created this us versus them scenario. So, in fact, I would say a lot of the fights that our denomination, we're part of the Wesleyan Church, is fighting right now is just kind of these remnants of that old way of thinking, where we've just kind of kept these rules in here that aren't biblical. In fact, Jesus right now could not be ordained in our denomination because he's way too sinful for us, apparently. And so we're still trying to fix things. It's a messy, dirty journey to get back on track once you've gotten off the path. And so it's great to hear you say that's a passion of yours as well. Yeah. Who is somebody in your life that has played a big role in either mentoring you, discipling you outside of your family? Who's somebody that's had a big impact on you? I
think the person who had the biggest impact was our associate pastor and his wife at the time of the church I was going to. They they would have loved all of this right now. They served in India. She went back to school to get her education recently. They were very mellow-headed, and in the best way possible, they always would just sit with the people that needed Jesus the most. Yeah. And it was just amazing to watch such gentle and caring, yet so fiercely passionate people just work in not just the church, but in my life. And just to have people out like in the church that cared so deeply about the things that I also cared about.
That's very good. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of carrying that torch now as a life group leader and trying to pass that down to other people. Tell us a little bit about your life group.
Yeah. So that life group was started with the 3 friends that I met and a couple others. And we started it, I think, 3 years ago. It was a young adult and college age life group. And it didn't really grow. It kind of just stayed as the few people that there were. And the whole point of the life group was trying to figure out who we were outside of our parents' religion and what did we believe, and kind of pushing the boundaries of, we're Gen Z, we're a little bit younger, we're kind of more accepting of people, and, people are going to move on, and that's okay too. So we went on for a couple life groups, and now I have a completely different group. It's no one is the same in the group except for me. Yeah, there's not one person who's the same. And it's just a mix of people. We have a lineman, we have a nurse, we have a student, we have someone who's a teacher, we have someone who does radio talk shows. Like, it's just a huge group of people, and they all are like, we grew up in the church, and we don't know where we stand anymore. Like, not that we've fallen away from the church, but what is God to us versus what was God to our parents.
That's so good. And you've had some tragedy in your life group in the last month. A month ago, our youth pastor, who was a part of your life group, and my nephew Daniel passed away. Yeah. And then Zeb passed away a couple weeks ago. How has that affected your group?
18 days was the distance between Zeb and Daniel passing.
It's such a young age. It's crazy to have 2 young men die. Zeb died in a car accident. Yes. And then Daniel died from diabetes. Just a fluke.
It has been one of the hardest things that I think, looking back on my life and knowing that at 16, there were some rough choices that were made, but versus now, realizing how short our life is, our earthly life. Yep. And it's kind of made me not necessarily rethink God and Jesus, but it's made me rethink kind of, what am I doing? Not in a bad way, but am I truly living out my life for Jesus every single day? Both men. You said that, Daniel had 1 foot in heaven and 1 foot on earth, and Zeb was the same way. And that's, I think, what was so hard is we would go to life group, and both of them, they weren't very talkative. They were pretty quiet, but when they said stuff, it was just wow, okay, I'm really going to think about that for the next 5 years. That's going to keep me up at night.
Thoughtful guys.
Yeah. And I just remember coming to my life group and saying, Daniel has passed away. And then less than 3 weeks later, coming back and saying, we have lost another one. Wow. All under the age of 26. They haven't even lived out half their life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's terrible. How has your life group supported Hope? Is Zeb's wife, and what has that process been of helping each other grieve and make it through the season?
So I think that we all we want to talk about it, yet we don't necessarily want to talk about it. And so the 2 life group sessions after they passed, we just sat and we mourned, we laughed, we cried, we joked, we were angry. And, the church right now is doing sermons about Job and kind of how he was mad at God. And we all have agreed together that we kind of feel a little bit mad at God right now. And so that's something that we're kind of going through. With Hope, I asked her, I said, do you want to come to life group? And she said, yes. And I said, I'm going to come pick you up. And when we came there, people were just bringing her stuff. And then she comes and she sits and we interact with her and we talked with her. And it's not just well, this is uncomfortable. We how do we interact with you? We're just going to keep not talking as if nothing didn't happen, but as if or not as if, but you are still loved, like you are still cared for. So that's kind of been the big thing, is how our life group is just not acting as if it didn't happen, but trying to work through it together.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for leading that group and supporting them through that season. Last question I have, and if there's anything else, you can throw it in there as well. But what's one thing that you feel like if you could tell everybody something that God has taught you, or a lesson that, or a message that you're really passionate about, what's something that you would want to share with everybody?
So it actually happened right after Zeb's funeral. I was reading like a devotion on the Bible app. You know, they kind of pick and choose things. And I was like, okay, I need one about grief. And throughout every single devotion, he was talking about this song, Good, Good Father. And I was like, okay, I'm getting a little bit sick of hearing about this song every single time. And I'm pulling into my driveway and it just starts playing. And I was like, okay, you are still a good, good father. You still care so deeply about me, about Hope, about my life group, about the church, about Colt. Like, you just are a good, good father. So I think that's like the big thing, is like, bad things are going to happen. And that's so terrible that it does. But he is still a good, good father through all of that.
Yep. So good.
Yeah. So good.
Thanks for spending time with us, Julia.
Yeah, of course.
This has been awesome.
Thanks for having me on in your busy schedule and my busy schedule.
We made it work, though.
Yeah, we made it work.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks for joining us today.